So let's discuss this further. I want to welcome in Cliff May, founder and president of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cliff, welcome to the show. You know, as I mentioned, the Ukrainians agreed to this unconditional ceasefire. Putin today wouldn't do that. What do you make of this call from what you know about it?
Well, I think we now know for sure, if we didn't before, that Putin is the impediment to a ceasefire and to peace. Putin is not particularly interested in a ceasefire. He's not interested at all in peace. What he's interested in is victory. And you said it well. He wants to expand, really restore the Russian Empire. He sees himself as the Tsar. Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire. He wants it back. He wants other parts of the Russian Empire back as well. That's why when you talk to people in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia, they're very worried about what happens should
I think we have a little
Putin's infrastructure. I'm not sure this partial ceasefire amounts to much. I'm actually even already getting reports that Putin is firing drones and missiles at various places. And if you had energy infrastructure limited, that still means hospitals, kindergartens, apartment buildings are fair game. So that's not very good. What needs to happen if Trump is going to succeed, he needs to do what he has threatened to do. He said, I can do devastating things to Russia. I can put serious sanctions on the economy, which is a suffering economy. Senator Lindsey Graham says he has legislation to help do that. That needs to be done. If there's enough pressure on Putin, he may accept a ceasefire. And maybe that gets to a frozen conflict. Do not expect peace and concord anytime soon.
Talk a little bit more about that, because in the readout from the White House, they ultimately talked about regulating relations between, or normalizing rather, relations between Russia and the U.S. for a long-term peace deal, for a lasting peace. But do you think that the president should be really levying that power now, even for a ceasefire deal?
Absolutely. If he doesn't, it won't happen. And you don't want, I don't think, to have regularized, normalized, good relations with Vladimir Putin while he has 20,000 Ukrainian children that he's abducted and is brainwashing and putting into forced adoptions inside Russia. I don't think you want normal relations while he is bombing hospitals and kindergartens. I don't think we want that. At least have a ceasefire. I don't expect Zelensky is going to get back all the land that's been taken so far. But you could freeze the conflict like we froze the conflict in 1953 between the two Koreas. North Korea would still like to conquer South Korea, but it hasn't been able to do so. And as long as America is on the side of South Korea, it won't.
Let's talk about the land a little bit, Cliff, because Putin currently controls about 20% of Ukraine. And it does seem like he has the momentum here, like I mentioned. He was an hour late to this phone call this morning, holding Trump up for an hour here. What does that signal to you? What is he trying to message? Was this a strategy from him?
Yes, he's sending a message, and he's sending a message that I don't need you, and I'm the one who's in charge here, and I'm going to keep you waiting, and I'm going to humiliate you a little bit, and that will be appreciated by my audiences here at home. Keep in mind when Steve Witkoff, who was the envoy for the president, met with Putin, he was kept waiting for 8 hours. 8 hours. What did Putin do in that time? He met with Alexander Lukashenko, who is the president of Belarus. What is Belarus? A vassal state, once part of the Russian Empire, kind of now. Putin wants to make Ukraine a colony or a vassal state, and he is being very tough. He's a tough negotiator. He's survived a long time. I think that if President Trump understands who he is, understands what he wants to do, and understands that President Trump has the better cards, to use a Trumpian metaphor, he has to play them. But those cards mean really tough sanctions. And I would say something else, increasing the flow of weapons to Ukraine.
Which is something Putin has asked not to do.
Well, Putin says, don't give them any more weapons.
Yeah.
Why not? Because then they'll be vulnerable. I'm the predator. I don't want my prey to be able to run away or fight me. That's what he's saying when he says no more weapons. We should actually increase that. President Biden put restrictions on the use of weapons in terms of targeting military sites inside Russia, President Trump could say, well, no, if they're defending themselves, let them do it as they want. There would come a time when Putin would say, okay, now I need a ceasefire. And then you could negotiate something. But what we saw today, I think President Trump realizes he's smart enough to. This was a disappointment. He hoped that Putin would say, yes, let's have a ceasefire. Let's negotiate. Putin could say, listen, I expanded the Russian empire. Mother Russia is bigger today than it was when I came into office. I have, as you say, 20% of the land of Ukraine. I have the Crimean Peninsula. That's where my Black Sea Fleet is based.
Right.
I've done okay, even though I haven't succeeded. But no, he still wants the whole enchilada. The whole enchilada is destroying Ukraine as a political entity, as a